Cowboy encounters 3 Apache women bathing in the creek. A stunning western moment. The sun was high over the rugged hills of the Arizona Territory, burning its golden light onto the dusty trails that twisted through the canyons. The air was dry and sharp, carrying the scent of sagebrush and distant pine. A lone cowboy rode along a narrow path, his horse's hooves kicking up small clouds of dust with every step. The man was tall, with a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his weathered face. His eyes, sharp and steady, scanned the rocky cliffs and the thin stretches of scrub that dotted the landscape. He had traveled this way many times before, but the land always seemed new, always filled with small surprises waiting around each bend. He carried little with him, only what he could strap to his horse. A rolled-up blanket, a small leather bag with a few supplies, and a water canteen that had seen better days. His boots were scuffed and worn from countless miles of trail, and the leather of his coat was stiff from sun and dust. Even after all these years on the frontier, he moved with the careful awareness of a man who understood the dangers of this untamed land. The desert was beautiful, but it was also unforgiving. One could lose a horse, a day, or even a life if not careful. Still, he loved it. Loved the solitude, the challenge, and the freedom that came from living where few others dared to go. As he rode, he thought about the small settlement he had left behind a few days ago. It was a quiet town, the kind where everyone knew each other's name and the pace of life was slow. He liked it well enough, but there was a restlessness in him that the town could never satisfy. Out here among the canyons and the dry riverbeds, he felt alive. Every sound, the call of a distant hawk, the rustle of lizards among the rocks, the soft wind whispering through the desert grasses, was a reminder that he was a part of something larger than himself. He didn't know where his journey would end, and perhaps that was the best part. The open land stretched ahead, full of possibilities. His horse, a sturdy chestnut with a white blaze across its forehead, moved steadily along the trail. The cowboy trusted the animal completely. It had been with him through many miles of rough terrain, through scorching heat and sudden storms. Sometimes he would speak quietly to it, telling it about the days ahead, about the hills and valleys they would cross. The horse's ears would flick back and forth, attentive, as if it understood every word. Out here, trust between man and horse was more than a convenience. It was survival. Without it, the trail could be merciless. After a while, the path began to descend toward a narrow valley. The air grew cooler, and the scent of water reached the cowboy's nose. He paused for a moment, listening to the distant gurgle of a creek flowing over smooth stones. He smiled under his hat. Water in this land was a treasure, and he knew it would be good to refill his canteen. As he guided his horse carefully down the slope, he noticed the creek winding through the valley, its surface sparkling in the sunlight. The rocks around it were worn smooth, and the banks were dotted with small patches of grass and wildflowers that had somehow found life in the harsh desert. He urged his horse forward slowly, taking care not to startle any creatures that might be nearby. Birds flitted through the trees along the bank, their calls echoing off the canyon walls. A rabbit darted across the path and vanished into the brush. The cowboy felt a sense of peace settle over him as he approached the water. Out here, the world seemed to slow down. The endless worries and noise of towns, the arguments and the chores, all of that faded away. There was only the land, the sky, the water, and the steady rhythm of his own breath. As he dismounted, he loosened the straps on his saddle and let the horse graze on a small patch of grass near the bank. He took his canteen and knelt by the water, letting the cool liquid rush over his hands. It was refreshing, almost sweet, in a way he had not expected. He drank a few mouthfuls, careful not to gulp too quickly, and then filled his canteen for the journey ahead. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long shadows across the valley and turning the rocks a deep shade of red. The canyon walls glowed in the fading light, and the cowboy could feel the cool evening air beginning to settle in. He looked around, taking in the beauty of the place. The creek curved gently through the valley, lined with smooth stones and small clusters of trees that provided welcome shade. The wind stirred the leaves, and the water reflected the colors of the sky, pinks and oranges blending with the green of the trees. It was quiet here, but not empty. Life thrived in its own secret ways. He saw tracks in the mud along the bank. Perhaps a deer, or maybe a coyote. The land held its stories if one knew how to read them. The cowboy stood for a moment, brushing the dust from his coat and adjusting his hat. He had traveled many miles that day, and the sight of the creek made him think about the days ahead. He had a route to follow, one that would take him through more canyons, over high ridges, and into other small settlements where he might find work or shelter. But for now, there was a pause, a moment to simply breathe and feel the land around him. He knew these were the times he would remember most. The quiet, simple moments where he was alone with nature, yet never truly alone. He could feel the horse shifting its weight beside him, sensing his calmness and readiness to continue. The cowboy ran a hand over its neck, feeling the warmth of its coat. This animal had carried him safely through deserts and storms alike, and he trusted it as he trusted no other companion. Out here, companions were scarce, and trust was rare. That bond was one of the few constants in a life that moved from one uncertain trail to the next. As the sun continued to sink, painting the sky with streaks of color, the cowboy tightened the saddle straps and prepared to move again. He looked at the path that stretched ahead, twisting through the canyon with no clear end in sight. Adventure awaited him in every shadow, every curve of the land! He knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new sights, and perhaps even new people. But for now he lingered a moment longer, listening to the gentle rush of water over stones, feeling the warmth of the fading sun on his back, and allowing himself to simply exist in a place untouched by the rush of the world. And in that quiet moment, as the desert whispered around him and the creek sang its steady song, the cowboy felt the deep, unspoken promise of the frontier. That life out here was hard, unpredictable, and often lonely, but it was also full of beauty, wonder, and moments that would stay with him forever. The cowboy had been walking his horse along the creek for a little while, enjoying the calm that the water brought to the rugged canyon. He had filled his canteen, let his horse graze, and even paused to stretch his legs. The sun had begun to dip lower, turning the rocks into shades of gold and red. Everything seemed peaceful, almost unreal in its quiet beauty. The only sounds were the trickle of water over stones, the rustle of leaves in the wind, and the occasional bird call from somewhere high above. As he moved carefully along the bank, he noticed a shimmer near the curve of the creek. At first he thought it was a trick of the light on the water, the way the sun made small waves sparkle. But as he drew closer, he realized it was movement, a gentle, deliberate movement of figures. His eyes narrowed, and his hand instinctively went to the edge of his coat where a small knife hung. He did not carry firearms for show. This was not a place for unnecessary risk. The canyon could hide dangers, and he had learned long ago that patience and observation were far better than rash action. He slowed his pace, keeping his horse steady beside him. The chestnut moved carefully too, seeming to understand the tension in the air. The cowboy's heart beat a little faster, not out of fear, but because the unknown always carried a thrill. He could see now that there were 3 figures moving near the water's edge. They were women, by their shape and the way they moved. They seemed unaware of him at first, focused entirely on their task. The cowboy studied them from the shadows of the trees and rocks. They were Apache women, dressed in simple clothing that had been tied or draped to allow freedom of movement. Their hair was dark and long, hanging down their backs, and their movements were careful and skilled, as if every action had a rhythm that came from years of experience with life in the land. They were washing clothes in the creek, scrubbing the fabric against stones, and gently dipping themselves in the water to rinse. He stayed quiet, crouched slightly, careful not to make a sound that would startle them. Out here, in a place where both the land and its people demanded respect, he knew that any sudden action could be dangerous. The Apache were known for their strength, their courage, and their ability to survive in the harshest conditions. The cowboy did not wish to alarm them, nor did he wish to intrude. He had always believed that witnessing life without interference was sometimes the highest form of respect. He could not help but notice the beauty of the moment. It was not the kind of beauty that was loud or dramatic. It was quiet, natural, and full of life. The sunlight sparkled on the water as it flowed around the women. The soft sound of their laughter carried faintly across the creek, and the wind rustled through the leaves overhead. He saw the care with which they tended to their tasks. the way they worked together without words, and the strength in their movements. They were clearly used to living in harmony with the land, understanding it, and respecting it. The cowboy took a slow step backward, pressing himself gently against the side of a tree to avoid being seen.
He thought about how unusual it was to witness such a scene.
He had traveled the West for many years, seen many towns and camps, but it was rare to find moments so private and serene, moments that seemed untouched by the troubles of the world. Here, in this hidden valley, life was alive in its simplest, purest form. One of the women suddenly paused. She stood tall in the shallow water, her dark eyes scanning the area. The cowboy froze, realizing that she might have noticed him. Their gaze met across the creek, and for a brief instant there was understanding. Neither spoke. Words were unnecessary. He could see the calm in her eyes, mixed with caution, a careful balance that spoke of intelligence and awareness. The cowboy tipped his hat slightly, a gesture of respect and acknowledgement. She tilted her head in return, not with fear but with recognition that he meant no harm. The other two women continued their work, their movements steady and focused, seemingly aware of the presence but trusting that nothing would come of it. The cowboy felt a sense of relief. Out here, respect could mean the difference between a peaceful encounter and a dangerous one. He knew that he had been lucky, that the moment was fleeting and delicate, and that the trust shown by these women was something to honor. He stayed where he was for a while longer, simply observing. He noticed the way the sun caught on the water, turning it into liquid gold, and the way the rocks glowed with deep red and orange hues. He could hear the faint hum of insects in the grass and the occasional splash as one of the women dipped a cloth into the creek. The simplicity of the scene was mesmerizing. Out here, in the vastness of the desert, life could be harsh, unforgiving, and lonely. Yet moments like this reminded him of the quiet joys that existed alongside the struggle. As he watched, the cowboy thought about his own life on the trail. He had always been a wanderer, moving from one place to another, often alone. Yet in this moment he felt a connection, not with words, but with the world around him. With the people whose lives were intertwined with the land. He realized that these encounters, however brief, were lessons about patience, respect, and the importance of seeing without interfering. The West was not just about survival and danger. It was also about moments of quiet understanding and recognition of others' humanity. He could see the small details now, the way the women's hands moved skillfully as they washed the cloth, the way the water streamed from the stones, and the way their hair fell naturally over their shoulders. Each gesture was part of a rhythm, a way of life that had been passed down through generations. He felt a deep admiration for their strength, independence, and grace. They lived fully in this land, aware of its dangers and possibilities, and he realized how much he could learn from simply watching and respecting their way of life. The cowboy stayed until the sun began to dip further, signaling the approach of evening. Shadows stretched long across the valley, and the temperature started to cool. He knew it was time to move on, to continue his journey before darkness made travel difficult. Yet he lingered a moment longer, capturing the memory of the creek and the three women who had unknowingly shared a part of their lives with him. When he finally stepped back and prepared to leave, he did so slowly and carefully, making sure not to disturb anything. He gave one last tip of the hat, a silent gesture of gratitude and respect. The woman who had noticed him earlier gave a small nod, acknowledging his presence one final time. Then, as the cowboy led his horse back to the trail, the creek returned to its quiet state, carrying the sound of water and wind as if nothing had happened at all. The encounter stayed with him. Even as he rode into the deeper canyons and across the sun-baked plains, he could see the images in his mind, the sunlight on the water, the graceful movements of the women, and the harmony of their simple tasks. He thought about the lessons he had learned without words, about patience, respect, and the importance of observing rather than interfering. These thoughts would remain with him for years, a memory that reminded him of the beauty and complexity of life on the frontier. By the time the cowboy reached the top of the ridge overlooking the valley, the sky had turned a deep orange and purple. Stars began to appear, one by one, in the vast desert sky. The land stretched endlessly before him, full of possibilities, dangers, and hidden moments like the one he had just witnessed. He urged his horse forward, moving along the trail with a sense of purpose, yet carrying with him the quiet knowledge that the world was full of surprises, and that sometimes the most memorable experiences were those observed in silence. As he disappeared along the winding path, the creek remained behind him, flowing steadily through the valley, a hidden jewel in the vast wilderness. The women returned to their work, unaware of the lasting impression they had left on the traveler. And in that vast and untamed land, life continued, full of quiet stories, fleeting encounters, and moments of unexpected connection that made the West a place of wonder, respect, and enduring memory. The cowboy had moved a short distance from the creek, his horse plodding steadily along the narrow trail. Yet his mind kept returning to what he had just seen. The image of the three Apache women, working together with such calm confidence, remained vivid in his thoughts. He had seen many things on the trail: wild horses racing across plains, thunderstorms tearing through canyons, and small towns with their own quiet stories. But few moments had struck him like this. It was not danger or excitement that captivated him. It was the simplicity and authenticity of life in its natural form. As he guided his horse along the path, he thought about the rhythm of the women's movements at the creek. How naturally they handled their tasks, how quietly they communicated without words, and how the land seemed to flow with them instead of against them. They were strong, careful, and fully aware of their surroundings. The cowboy knew that life in these canyons and valleys required constant attention and adaptability. Every step, every glance, every sound could hold meaning. Yet the women had mastered it, living in balance with the land, moving with confidence and understanding. The cowboy's boots scuffed against loose stones as he walked, and he glanced down at the trail stretching ahead. The canyon walls rose sharply on either side, the shadows deepening as the sun moved closer to the horizon. The air carried a subtle chill now, signaling the approach of evening. He breathed deeply, savoring the clean, dry scent of the desert mingled with the faint aroma of the creek water. Out here, life was raw and elemental, stripped of unnecessary concerns. Every traveler learned to respect it, and every resident learned to survive within it. He thought about the trust he had felt during the encounter at the creek, the way one of the women had acknowledged his presence without fear, and the quiet understanding that had passed between them lingered in his mind. It was rare to meet someone in the wilderness and have an unspoken connection. The cowboy had often encountered people on the trail, some friendly, some cautious, and some openly hostile. But this encounter had been different. It was a moment of recognition between strangers, separated by culture and circumstance, yet united in respect and awareness. The path ahead twisted around a rocky bend, revealing a stretch of open land where sagebrush grew thickly, dotted with the occasional wildflower. The sun's last light touched the tops of the distant hills, painting them in shades of orange and purple. The cowboy slowed his horse, sensing that the day was reaching its natural pause. He had learned that the West often rewarded patience, that the best way to understand it was to move slowly and observe carefully. It was not always speed or force that carried one safely through the frontier, but awareness and caution. He found a small, flat area to stop, where the horse could graze while he stretched. He ran a hand along the animal's neck, feeling the warmth of its coat. The horse had been his companion through countless miles, and he trusted it as he would few people. Together, they had traveled deserts, canyons, and mountains, surviving storms and scarce water. He looked around at the landscape, thinking about how each element, stone, water, wind, and sky, shaped life here. It demanded respect, attention, and understanding. As he rested, he reflected on the fleeting nature of encounters like the one at the creek. The West was full of hidden moments, visible only to those patient enough to notice. He thought about the Apache women again, imagining their evening routine after finishing at the creek. Perhaps they would return to their families, to small homes or camps, sharing the day's labor and news with one another. Perhaps their laughter would carry softly through the canyon, a reminder that life went on even in a land that could be harsh and unforgiving. The cowboy reached for his small notebook, an old leather-bound journal he kept tucked in his bag. He rarely wrote, but when he did, it was to capture moments like this. He recorded the colors of the sunset, the quiet murmur of the creek, and the strength he had observed in the women. He wrote about the trust that had passed between them, how fleeting encounters could leave lasting impressions. Even in the wilderness, life was rich with lessons and memories, if one took the time to notice. He paused again, listening to the soft rustle of leaves in the wind and the distant call of a hawk circling high above. The world seemed to hold its breath at times like these, as if acknowledging the significance of small, simple moments. He knew that many travelers would pass through this land without seeing or understanding these subtleties. But he had learned over years on the trail that the frontier rewarded attentiveness, that the most meaningful stories were often quiet, hidden, and easily overlooked by the impatient or the unobservant. The cowboy thought about his own life, about the roads he had taken and the choices he had made. Many of those decisions had been made out of necessity, often involving survival, work, or the need to move on to the next settlement. But in moments like these, he was reminded that life was not only about movement and survival, it was also about appreciation. He realized that he had spent too long chasing only practical goals, and that he needed to make time to simply witness the world, to feel it, and to learn from it. He looked down at his horse, noting how the animal shifted its weight and grazed with careful attention. The horse had an understanding of the land that the cowboy envied. It moved through the desert with balance and ease, sensing danger, water, and shelter instinctively. He smiled faintly, recognizing that there was much humans could learn from observing the creatures that shared the land. Life out here demanded respect for every being, for every stone and stream, and for the subtle rhythms that governed survival. The sun disappeared completely behind the western hills, leaving the sky painted in deep indigo, with streaks of fading orange. Shadows lengthened, and the first stars appeared, blinking softly above the vast desert. The cowboy prepared for the coming night, gathering his horse's reins and ensuring their path forward was clear. He had learned that travel after dark required extra caution. The trail could be deceptive, and one misstep could mean injury or worse. Yet the night also brought clarity in its own way. The cool air, the stillness, and the opportunity to reflect on the day's events. He mounted his horse and moved slowly along the trail, feeling the rhythm of the animal beneath him. Thoughts of the creek and the women remained in his mind, growing into a quiet narrative of respect and admiration. He thought about the countless generations who had lived in these canyons, including the Apache people, whose knowledge of the land surpassed his own. Their understanding of water, weather, and survival was profound, and he felt honored to have witnessed even a brief glimpse of it. As he rode, he imagined telling his story to others someday, though he knew few would understand the significance of what he had seen. Many travelers would speak only of danger, of towns, or of cattle, missing the quiet lessons hidden in simple life. He reflected on how easy it was to move through the world without noticing the depth of what lay around him. But this encounter had reminded him that the West was alive in ways beyond physical survival. It was alive in culture, tradition, and the enduring spirit of its people. Hours passed as he followed the winding trail. The night grew cooler and the sounds of the desert became more pronounced. Owls called from distant trees, crickets filled the air with a steady rhythm, and the creek, now out of sight, whispered in his memory. The cowboy felt a sense of connection to the land that was deeper than he could have explained. It was a feeling born of observation, respect, and acknowledgement of life in its purest form. Finally, he paused on a small rise overlooking the valley below. The land stretched endlessly, dotted with dark silhouettes of cacti, rocks, and distant trees. The memory of the creek, the flowing water, and the three women lingered like a quiet light in his mind. He realized that this moment, like so many on the trail, was fleeting, yet it had the power to shape the way he viewed the world. It was a lesson in patience, respect, and the quiet strength of those who lived in harmony with their surroundings. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air fill his lungs. The West was vast, full of unknowns, and yet full of small, meaningful discoveries. The cowboy knew that he would carry this experience with him for the rest of his life. It was not a story of adventure or danger, but of observation, connection, and the beauty of life lived close to the land. Mounting his horse one last time for the night, he set off toward a small campsite he had marked earlier. Stars twinkled above, and the canyon walls reflected the faint glow of moonlight. The trail was quiet, but the cowboy felt alive, full of appreciation for the people he had seen and the land he had traveled. He understood now that the West was not only a place to survive, it was a place to witness, to learn, and to honor the lives that existed alongside him, hidden yet vibrant, like the creek and the women he had encountered. As he disappeared into the night, the cowboy carried with him a memory that would not fade, a lesson in quiet dignity, harmony with the land, and the profound impact of simply witnessing life with respect. The world around him was harsh, yes, but it was also rich, full of unexpected beauty, and alive in ways that would forever shape his journey. The cowboy had spent the night under a sparse canopy of trees, listening to the gentle rustle of leaves in the evening breeze and the distant trickle of the creek he had discovered earlier. The stars stretched across the sky like tiny lanterns, and the air had a crisp freshness that carried the scent of earth and grass. He had slept lightly, knowing that the frontier was unpredictable and that travelers must always be alert. Yet he felt a calmness in the quiet of the night, as if the land itself had welcomed him. At dawn he stirred to the soft light that crept across the canyon walls. He stretched, feeling the soreness of long hours on horseback, and glanced around at the small campsite he had made. His horse, sturdy and reliable, grazed quietly nearby, aware of the day ahead. The cowboy had learned over time that the West demanded both caution and patience, and as he prepared to continue his journey, he felt both a sense of purpose and a quiet excitement. Today, he would return to the creek, hoping to witness more of the land's hidden life without disturbing it. As he rode, the canyon opened into a wider valley. The creek wound through it, reflecting the morning light like a ribbon of silver. Birds darted over the water and small animals scurried among the rocks and grass. The cowboy guided his horse carefully along the bank, taking care not to startle the wildlife. Every step reminded him of the balance required to live in such a place. Life here was fragile and demanding, yet full of surprises for those patient enough to notice. As he approached the creek, he saw movement among the trees. The 3 Apache women were there again, returning to their morning tasks. They were gathering water, washing clothes, and tending to small chores along the bank. The cowboy paused, keeping a safe distance, and allowed himself to observe quietly. This was not the time for conversation or interference. It was a moment for respect, a chance to witness life unfolding naturally. He noticed the precision in their movements. One woman knelt by the water, scrubbing a piece of cloth against a smooth stone with practiced ease. Another was adjusting a bundle of firewood she had collected nearby, stacking it neatly for later use. The third was tending to the edges of the creek, making sure that the water flowed freely and that the small plants along the bank were not disturbed. Each movement was deliberate, efficient, and graceful, demonstrating a deep understanding of both the land and the tasks at hand. The cowboy reflected on what he had learned so far. Observation had taught him more than years of wandering alone could. He had seen courage in action, skill in routine, and strength in quiet independence. The women had no need to speak to convey their purpose. Their actions were a language in themselves. It was a reminder that the frontier was not only about survival in the face of danger, but also about the mastery of daily life, about understanding the world and living in harmony with it. He kept his horse close, yet out of sight, and allowed his gaze to wander over the valley. The sun was climbing higher, casting a warm glow over the landscape. The creek sparkled, and the canyon walls glowed a soft gold. In the distance he could see the outline of hills where wild animals might roam, and the occasional flutter of wings as birds moved from tree to tree. It was a landscape alive with activity, yet balanced in a way that only those familiar with it could truly appreciate. The cowboy found himself noticing small details. The way sunlight reflected off the water's surface, the careful stacking of firewood, the subtle gestures of communication between the women. Even the sound of the creek carried meaning, a reminder that water was life in these lands, precious and respected. He thought about the generations who had lived here before him, learning the patterns of the land and passing them down through experience and observation. The Apache women embodied that knowledge, their lives intertwined with the earth and the water in ways he could barely begin to understand. Time seemed to slow as he watched. The cowboy realized that this was one of those rare moments in life where observation itself became a form of connection. He did not speak, he did not approach, yet there was understanding, a silent acknowledgement of presence and respect. One of the women paused, her head turning slightly as if sensing him nearby. Their eyes met again, briefly, and this time there was a subtle nod, a quiet acceptance that he meant no harm, and that he was only a witness. The cowboy tipped his hat in response, feeling a sense of shared respect that transcended words. He allowed himself to linger, taking mental notes of the scene. The creek, the women, the movement of the animals, and the interplay of light and shadow all combined to form a memory that he knew would last a lifetime. It was a lesson in humility and patience, reminding him that the West was not only a place of challenge, but also a place of profound beauty and understanding. Life here required careful attention, respect for others, and an awareness of one's place in the world. As the morning passed, the women began to move away from the creek, gathering their belongings and heading toward areas that seemed to be part of a larger camp or village. The cowboy stayed where he was, careful not to follow too closely. He understood that their lives were private and that the trust of being observed from a distance was fragile. He had already been allowed a glimpse of their world, and that was enough. There was a quiet satisfaction in witnessing life without imposing upon it. He thought about how the women must have lived in this land for years, learning every curve of the creek, every stone, and every animal trail. Their knowledge of the natural world was profound, born not from books but from lived experience. He admired their skill, their independence, and their ability to work together seamlessly. It was a skill set that he could never hope to replicate fully, no matter how many years he spent on the trail. Their lives were interwoven with the land itself, and he felt privileged to have seen even a small part of it. The cowboy led his horse back along the path he had come, reflecting on the lessons of the morning. There was humility in understanding that he was a visitor in a world that had existed long before him and would continue long after he passed. His own travels, his own stories, were temporary in comparison to the enduring rhythms of the land and the people who lived within it. Yet he felt that this encounter had given him insight, a deeper appreciation for the quiet dignity of daily life and the importance of observation. As he rode, he noticed the subtle signs of life around him. Tracks in the soil showed where deer had passed, where birds had landed, and where small animals had burrowed. The wind carried hints of distant fires and the scent of wild plants. Every detail held meaning, and the cowboy understood that noticing these things was part of survival and part of understanding the beauty of the land. Each moment was a reminder that life was full of lessons if one had the patience to see them. By midday, the cowboy reached a higher ridge overlooking the valley. From this vantage point, he could see the creek winding through the land, the forested areas along its banks, and the subtle trails where animals had passed. The Apache women were no longer visible, but their presence remained in his mind. He thought about the courage it must take to live here, to navigate the challenges of the frontier while maintaining dignity and independence. The canyon was not always forgiving, but they had mastered it, and he had witnessed a small part of that mastery. He paused to rest, letting the horse graze and taking in the view. The sun was strong now, casting long shadows and highlighting the colors of the land. The valley seemed alive with movement, from the water in the creek to the occasional bird in flight. The cowboy reflected on how much he had learned from simply observing, and he realized that some of the most meaningful encounters in life were those that required patience, respect, and quiet attention. As he prepared to continue his journey, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The West was vast and full of surprises, and he understood that his role as a traveler was not only to move through it, but also to witness and respect it. The encounter at the creek had been brief, but it had left a lasting impression. It reminded him that life was about more than survival. It was about learning, observing, and appreciating the strength and dignity of others. He mounted his horse and continued along the trail, carrying with him the memory of the women, the creek, and the quiet beauty of the land. The canyon stretched ahead, full of unknown challenges, but also full of lessons and hidden moments. Every step, every glance, and every breath in this land offered a chance to learn something new about the world and about himself. The cowboy knew that he would carry this morning with him for the rest of his life, a reminder that the West was a place of beauty, respect, and enduring wisdom. The cowboy rode on as the afternoon sun began to sink toward the horizon. The sky was painted in brilliant shades of gold, orange, and pink, fading into the deep blue of approaching evening. The canyon walls glowed with warm light, casting long, dramatic shadows across the land. He guided his horse slowly, not in a hurry, letting the moments settle around him. Today had been unlike many others on the trail. He had witnessed life in its simplest and purest form, and the memory of the creek and the three Apache women stayed in his mind like a quietly glowing ember. He thought back to the morning when the women had moved through their tasks with such skill and harmony. Every movement had been deliberate, every gesture meaningful. There had been no rush, no need to impress, only life unfolding naturally in its own rhythm. The cowboy had watched in silence, respecting their space, and in return he had been granted a glimpse into a world he had never truly known. It was a rare gift, one that he knew he would carry with him forever. As he rode, the canyon narrowed and opened again, revealing stretches of desert dotted with sagebrush, small clusters of trees, and distant rocky hills. The land was harsh, yet alive, full of hidden streams, small animals, and the occasional bird of prey circling high above. The cowboy felt a deep sense of connection to it all. This was a land that demanded respect, patience, and awareness. It could be unforgiving, but it was also full of beauty and life for those willing to notice. He glanced down at his horse, feeling the steady rhythm of its steps. The chestnut moved with confidence, sure-footed along the rocky path, and the cowboy smiled faintly. They had traveled many miles together through storms and sunshine, across valleys and cliffs. The horse understood the land in ways the cowboy could only begin to comprehend, and he was grateful for the animal's presence and companionship. Life on the trail was easier with such a partner, one who could sense danger and find paths where none seemed visible. The memory of the women at the creek returned again. He thought about their strength, independence, and knowledge of the land. They had moved with ease through the water, treating every task as part of a larger harmony that existed between themselves and the natural world. There had been no words exchanged, yet a quiet understanding had passed between them. The cowboy realized that this encounter had taught him more than any story told by campfire or town gossip ever could. He had learned about respect, patience, and the power of simply observing life without interference. The canyon walls rose higher as he followed the winding trail. Shadows stretched long, and the air had begun to cool, carrying with it the earthy scent of the desert and the faint aroma of distant wildflowers. The cowboy adjusted his hat and ran a hand across his face, feeling the warmth of the sun lingering despite the shade. He reflected on his own life, his constant movement from one place to another, and the lessons he had learned on the trail. So many travelers focused only on survival, on reaching the next town or finding work. But he realized that true understanding came from moments like this, moments of quiet observation and reflection. As he continued, he found a small rise overlooking the valley below. From this vantage point, he could see the creek winding its way through the land, glinting in the fading sunlight. The memory of the women seemed to linger in that water, in the gentle flow of the stream and the rhythm of the land itself. He imagined their evening, perhaps gathering around a fire with their families, sharing food and stories, laughing softly in the twilight. It was a life deeply connected to the land, full of challenges yet rich with meaning. The cowboy let his horse graze as he sat quietly on a rock, watching the sky change color. The first stars appeared, twinkling above the canyon. The world seemed vast, endless, and yet intimate in a way that only the frontier could offer. He thought about all the travelers who had come before him, all the people who had lived in these valleys, hunted in these canyons, and understood the land as he was beginning to understand it. Each encounter, each observation added to the story of the West, a story of survival, courage, and quiet beauty. He remembered the trust shown by the woman who had acknowledged him at the creek. Their silent communication had been brief, but it had been meaningful. She had understood that he meant no harm, and in return she had allowed him to witness a small part of her life. It was a lesson he would never forget. Respect, he realized, was not just about politeness or manners. It was about understanding boundaries, acknowledging the dignity of others, and acting with care even when no one is watching. As night approached, the cowboy made his way to a small flat area he had noticed earlier, a safe place to camp for the night. He gathered firewood and set a small, controlled fire, careful not to disturb the land around him. The crackle of the flames was comforting, and the warmth it provided was welcome as the air grew cooler. He gave his horse water and allowed it to rest while he reflected on the day's events. Sitting by the fire, he thought about how different this day had been from so many others on the trail. There had been no confrontation, no danger, yet it had left a deeper impression than any fight or chase ever could. He realized that the most memorable moments were often quiet ones, full of subtle meaning and human connection. The creek, the flowing water, the women, and the land had all combined to create a memory that would remain with him forever. He thought about the future, about the miles he would continue to travel, and the people he would meet. Some encounters might be brief, some difficult, and others dangerous. But he knew now that the moments of respect, observation, and quiet understanding were just as important as survival or success. They shaped who he was, who he wanted to be, and how he would move through the world. The cowboy gazed at the stars, noticing the constellations he had come to recognize over years of travel. Each one seemed to tell a story, a reminder that the world was vast and full of mysteries yet to be discovered. The land beneath him was rugged and untamed, but it held lessons and memories for those patient enough to notice. He felt a sense of gratitude for the encounter at the creek, for the opportunity to witness life as it truly was, and for the understanding that even a brief moment could carry profound meaning. He wrote briefly in his notebook, capturing the colors of the sunset, the gentle flow of the creek, and the quiet strength of the women he had seen. Writing helped him remember, helped him hold on to the lessons of the day. He knew that the memory would serve him in future travels, a reminder to move with awareness, respect, and patience. Life on the trail could be unpredictable, but moments like these made every mile worthwhile. The night grew darker, and the fire crackled softly. The cowboy leaned back against a rock, letting the warmth seep into him. He could hear distant animals moving through the canyon, the soft call of owls, and the whisper of wind through the trees. The world was alive, full of subtle activity, and he felt part of it in a way he rarely experienced in towns or settlements. Out here, in the vastness of the frontier, life was raw, real, and full of quiet lessons. As he prepared to rest for the night, the cowboy reflected on the true meaning of his journey. It was not only about moving from place to place, surviving, or finding work. It was about understanding the land, observing the people, and learning from the quiet moments that often went unnoticed. The encounter at the creek had been a gift, a chance to see life in its natural rhythm, and he knew it would remain with him as one of the most profound experiences of his travels. The cowboy closed his eyes, listening to the night sounds of the canyon, and felt a deep sense of peace. He had traveled many miles and faced many challenges, but this day reminded him that life's most meaningful moments were often those of quiet observation and respect. The memory of the creek, the women, and the harmony of their actions would stay with him forever, a testament to the beauty of the frontier and the enduring spirit of those who lived within it. As the fire dimmed and the stars shone brighter overhead, the cowboy drifted into a light sleep, comforted by the knowledge that he had witnessed something rare and valuable. The West was vast, harsh, and unpredictable, yet it was also full of moments of quiet beauty, human dignity, and profound lessons. And in that night, under the vast canopy of stars, he carried with him the understanding that life was richer when observed with care, respect, and patience. When dawn came again, he would rise, continue his journey, and encounter more challenges and wonders along the trail. But he would always carry the memory of the creek, the women, and the harmony of life in the desert. It was a memory that reminded him that the West was not only a place of survival, but also a place of beauty, respect, and quiet, enduring wisdom. The cowboy knew that someday, when telling his stories, he would recount many adventures, but this day would always stand apart. Not for danger or excitement, but for the quiet strength and dignity he had witnessed. And as he mounted his horse and rode into the glowing morning, he felt a sense of gratitude for the lesson the land had given him, a reminder that respect, observation, and understanding were as important as courage and skill on the trail.